Thank you very much, and thank you very much for this great panel of participants. And I'll start with some numbers, just quoting numbers from 2016 about the investment of AI in North America. It was an order of 20 billion euros in 1 year in AI. In Asia, it was an order of 10 billion euros, and the estimate that was made by a team of investigators is that in Europe, and I know that we are not really in Europe, but we are going to look at ourselves as some kind of some associate partner in the European Union. But in Europe, it was 2.4 to 3.2 billion euros. So the investment was much, much smaller. And there was a team of experts called HLEG AI, the high-level expert group on AI, of 52 experts that were assembled from Google and IBM and the Sorbonne and Oxford and many other locations, who did an estimate of what could be the role of AI in Europe and what should be changed. And they say that AI can bring major benefits to our societies, from helping diagnose and cure cancers to reducing energy consumptions. So I think by now it's clear, and I don't need to repeat, I just wanted to throw at you some quotations from recent reports that shows that AI is going to change many things, and everybody believes that it can change and will change in healthcare as well. And this panel is to better understand what this panel of experts thinks about these changes, how it's going to change, how it's going to affect. And I'm going to ask each one of you the same question, and you come from a very different angle, so please share more about yourself and provide examples from your own experience. And what I hear a lot from physicians is that we know that there's AI, we know that this research is performed, but we don't see how it's going to help patients. We're not sure that it's going to be really used. So really used means extending lives, really used meaning better quality of lives. What do you think? Will AI in the next 10 years or so will change life expectancy, will help quality of lives? I don't know, maybe Kira, do you want to be first?
Definitely. So I'll tell you a little bit about my personal experience. I don't think it's only in medicine. I think it's in every field. Everybody thought you're going to get AI and people are going to go out of jobs, right? We won't need any people. We're going to have only AI. And I think a few years already passed and we still have our own jobs, right? Even more than that, if you look at it, there was only one job that disappeared in the last 200 years. And this is the person who's actually making the elevator go up and down. And I actually met one in New York once. So I think the problem is in thinking about the fact that AI is actually going to replace doctors. And I think this is a lot of the fear. And frankly, I don't see it happening in the next few years, right? Maybe in 50 years, but it's so hard to predict that far. What I personally believe in is hybrid models of AI with the humans, right? I'm thinking is, how can you make a doctor a superhuman or a nurse? How can we take a system, which is an AI that looks at so much data and build real decision support systems that can affect the way that doctors work every day? And I'm going to give you one from my personal experience. One of the things that we've noticed when working with doctors with AI systems, so we developed this amazing system that looks at 73 million visits in ERs, primary care, and that predicts differential diagnosis. We thought that every doctor on earth would want a system to predict diagnosis. Why not, right? And then we made smaller features about automation. It turns out that what the system, from all of the features that we developed, the thing doctors love the most is the following. The fact that patients answer in Spanish, but a medical summary is in English. You know, it sounds funny, but it actually saves around 10 minutes for the doctor per patient because they can actually understand him. If they can understand the patient, they can treat him better. And the actual diagnosis errors went down by only the simple automation. Another thing, there's so many things inside the EMR that are so outrageous, actually. The fact that they have to document in one place, it's not going to another place. Fixing all of those things changed additional 10 minutes. Some of them were done by AI. So my personal belief is, how can we bring AI to enable better automation for doctors? We don't need to go to all the way and say, hey, this is completely going to replace doctors, because we don't know even legally how we're going to treat this, right? We don't know how we're legally going to treat autonomous cars, so how can we think about this in healthcare? So first of all, yes, AI is going to change things, but it's not going to change this in a way that is going to replace doctors, but actually extend their abilities. If you think about this, an EKG, right? How can a doctor now, when somebody comes without a chest pain, do something without EKG? And you still have lots of sensors, additional ones, that are extending their ability. This is what I think AI is just going to be, an additional sensor that helps automate all these things.
Thank you very much. I still need from you a number. So if we look at, I don't know, 48 or at the beginning of the country here, the more or less life expectancy, according to several numbers, was 40-something. Now it's close to 80. Do you think that all these super physicians with their extended capabilities will bring us more years in life expectancy here in Israel, and how many? Can you give a number?
You don't need the numbers from me. There's many studies that already study this, and the expectancy today is averaged around 120. This is the expectations from people who studied this. When I only met my husband when we were 8, I asked him, what do you want to do when you grow up? He says, why do I need to decide? I don't know about you, but I'm going to live forever. And I'm not sure that it's that funny. I think that we can definitely extend life to around 120 and 200 as well, if we get to focus around the aging. It is a problem. I think it's the most deadly problem that we have at this point, right? Many people are trying to actually treat this, and I think a lot of the progresses that we're doing today are going to help our children live forever.
Thank you, and we are going to ask from an expert in one of the deadly diseases, although it's also chronic disease. What do you think about that?
Hi, I'm an oncologist. That means that I see cancer patients almost every day, and actually today I have a clinic of about 20 patients waiting for me later on today. And in one way, we're not going to change a lot, but on the other way, we're going to see huge changes, even in the next year or so. And I relate to several things. First of all, we thought that when we're going to start the personalized medicine, we're going to have miracles. We're going to find a specific mutation, find the mutation, give the direct therapy, treat the patients, everything going fine. But we now know the mutations. We have the human genome from about 16 years ago, and we don't see that miracle. So that was a kind of a disappointment. On the other way, we are now trying to look at the genomic data on a different way and look at it as a big data. And if you look at many papers that have been published, we saw papers of about 20 patients, 30 patients, 100 patients that were sequenced, and we know the mutations. But if you look at these numbers and try to, and remember that cancer is actually hundreds of diseases, you cannot take 100 patients and get to any conclusion about them. So we must look at the big data, also at the genomic level, not just at the patient attitudes and the way he gets treatment, but also really at the biological levels. And I think that AI can also transform the biology. And we have a wonderful example from the work that we're doing now. We are now collaborating with Foundation One, company of Roche, and we are digging in the database that they have. And they have a database of 200,000 genomes. And when you try to combine the mutations that you find there with the clinical data, you suddenly get new insights. For example, we are now trying to understand, we just got new data showing that we can predict the way the cancer will develop. And we can say, or we try to predict that for one patient, the metastasis will appear in the liver, and for the other one, it will appear in the lungs. And all that data is there at the beginning of the tumor. It is there at the basic mutation profiles of the patients. So it's not a simple, it's not going to be very simple that one mutation, one therapy, and that's it. It's going much more complex than that, but we see how, I think we can see some light in front of us showing us the way to proceed. And another thing, we try to predict response to therapy, again, in a very simple kind of one-layer analysis. We give the patient the medication, we don't look much at the patient, his mutations or other things, other variables, and try to predict whether we'll respond or not, according to a single biomarker. And this is how it works today. We take a patient, we take one biomarker, give medication, and see what's going on. But we know that it's much more complex than that. And actually, the prediction, the response can be predicted probably by a host of genomic factors, lots of SNPs that can affect, for example, the pharmacokinetic of the medication. It can be affected by demographics, by age. And I think that combining all these together will allow us to predict much better how a patient will respond and how to treat the patient. So it's going to be much more complex, but we do see early successes right now, right away. It's not going to replace the physicians. And I can say that as an oncologist, the patients want the personal touch, they want to hug us, they want to cry with us, and I don't think that any AI can cry with the patient. So that's kind of a gap that we think how to close.
Probably we can make a machine to cry, but it will be very artificial. The Google expert, can you share with us where you see the most important innovation in AI that can change the lives of patients?
So I want to start by answering the original life expectancy question. So as you know, probably the most important factor in increasing life expectancy is right here on the table in front of us, which is clean drinking water, right? So if you actually want to increase life expectancy, it's often not in the high-end treatments for rare diseases. It's often in helping many people get access to very basic things that we think of them as, you know, every day. Our ability to get good medicine in Israel is something which sometimes we even take for granted, but it is not the way in most of the world. And I think that AI is very good at enabling people in the third world with access to the treatment that we're used to here. And yes, maybe it's not going to be with a human doctor, it's going to be with an AI, and maybe the AI is not going to be as good as a doctor, it's only going to be 80% as good. But still, I think that it can make a very dramatic effect on their lives. And if we can help them and sort of say, okay, this is what we do today, this is what we get in the Western world, let's do a little bit less, but let's give it to people all around the world, I think that can make the biggest difference in life expectancy.
Thank you. Because we are short in time, I'll ask Nigel, and you have next to you, I think, can you share with us about your journey of trying to change the opportunities for patients in Europe?
Thank you, yeah. First and foremost, I agree with all the comments that have been made, but I do think we stand a risk of looking at healthcare, as always, in isolation. So we're looking at a situation in the world where if we see temperatures rise by 1.5, 2 degrees, it's going to have a remarkable impact on our environment and our society. We're poisoning our environment every day, unfortunately. Nearly everything is full of plastic. So there's only so much that we can expect so-called artificial intelligence to address in a larger scheme of things than just in healthcare itself. It's not a term I actually like as well, artificial intelligence, because it's artificial, but it's not very intelligent at the moment. Maybe augmented, and maybe we're obviously talking about augmenting the physician, but maybe actually augmenting us as patients in trying to traverse and triage how we get to see the right specialist, how we get the right optimal treatment and ensure the right outcomes and so forth. And importantly, one of the key challenges that we face, as you said with water and everything else, is access. When we talk about aging and living longer and so forth, is that for everyone or for a select few that can afford it? So we have some really significant issues which go way beyond, I think, just sitting within the clinic within AI. And we within the pharmaceutical industry, just as in the clinical care provider side of healthcare or payer and so forth, all faced with similar issues with AI or augmented intelligence. What we're trying to do is improve the processes that we have day to day for better outcomes, which we are challenged with all the time. Life is just too complex. And more importantly, where we're really faced with is a... Okay, broken one microphone onto the next one. But what we face with this is this challenge of improving processes for outcomes which are better than we are faced today. And that's driven by a lot of dissatisfaction, of course, and stress. But more importantly, we have a big deficit in learning. So we are very poor, actually, particularly in healthcare, but in many areas, of learning from experience. And biologically, we tend to overestimate the near term and underestimate the long term, maybe, as well. And that's a biological imperative. So we have really big challenges where improved systems, if you like, and augmented intelligence can assist us. One of the biggest challenges, of course, is this intelligence that we're creating useful to us, but is it representative? We know there are issues outside of healthcare, like face recognition, for instance, highly biased. unfortunately, but it's being rolled out across the world and in many countries. So also for us, can we discover the right compound in terms of development? Can we improve that by using algorithms and machine learning? Can we optimize clinical trials, which are hellishly expensive, very complex and complicated to do and never meet milestones? And can we improve actually outcomes where we understand the real-world outcomes of what we're using in treatments versus the very artificial environment of clinical trials? So as a quick plug, which is kind of set up actually, but one of the projects I'm involved in and co-leading is something called EDEN, the European Health Data and Evidence Network, EHDEN. And this is under IMI, Innovative Medicines Initiative, which is a public-private partnership in Europe. So all projects are funded 50% by the European Union, taxpayer money, and 50% in kind or in cash from the industry. And the project is truly public-private partnership. So we have 22 partners, 11 industry, 11 public. It's under Horizon 2020, so Israel can also be party to this as well. And we're going to create a federated network for open science research in Europe over the coming 5 years. And federated means that we will work with data locally, wherever a hospital or primary care network or similar integrated regional database sits, maintain data behind the firewall, map it to a common data model. We're using the OMOP common data model, if you're familiar with that, under the Odyssey OHTSI global collaboration. And then we will distribute the query, the analytics, to where the data is. So this is kind of privacy by design under GDPR. We're looking to harmonize about 100 million plus health records, 20% of the European population, to the OMOP common data model locally in this federated model. We will train, certify and qualify SMEs to work with data partners to do that across Europe. And we've had the initial pilot call started on the 1st of April. And for those hospitals, hospital networks, primary care networks, and others data partners who are interested, they can apply to EDEN for a grant, and we will provide a capped grant to cover the cost of that mapping linked with the certified SME. And then, hopefully, as the federated network grows, we'll be able to run an open science, distributed analytical process across Europe in this kind of digital railway network that we've created with all the right tracks for people to run their study trains. And we will also support further education, methodological development, use cases, and so on. We're also collaborating with the European Medicines Agency around things like pharmacovigilance, drug utilization, and so forth. So actually, it's more of a Eurovision Song Contest version of Europe than the European Union. So Israel would also qualify. We're already hosting it next month, but you would also qualify under Horizon 2020 for any centres or SMEs that are involved in EDEN to be involved. One of the key reasons is we want to support predictive analytics, distributed predictive analytics in that model and that federated network. And what we all need is data. And we need highly deep, diffuse, T-shaped and representative data from a large geographies to improve these kind of algorithms.
Same question? Thanks. So I want to touch on another angle and maybe put a price tag to what we're going to save. I'm not sure whether everyone knows, but every year about $100 billion are spent in clinical trials by pharmaceutical companies, $100 billion. And most of the trials fail. So an average development of a drug costs about $2.6 billion. Now, when we sit with FDA, when we sit with a regulator, they're old-fashioned. The way you run clinical study today is you ask the patient to come to the clinic every month, let's say every 2 weeks. You run scales for 5 to 7 hours, and then you analyze the data. We, of course, want to run right away to big databases and so forth, but it's not very feasible because what we encounter with FDA. But what we can do, and we are doing very practical things currently, and I'll give you a few examples. One of the things that are failing clinical trials is the placebo effect. So what we see is an increase in placebo effect in recent years, meaning that studies that have been successful in, let's say, 20 years ago, would now fail because the treatment effect is the same, but placebo effect is much higher. One thing that we can do is running blinded data analytics, meaning you have your investigators, you have your data, You don't know what patient and what data is coming from placebo, what data is coming from drug, but you run blinded data analytics in real time. And then you can detect investigators or clinical centers that are performing poorly in terms of quality of data. How do you know if it's good quality of data or not? Because you don't know who's on placebo, who is not. But you can see the quality of data based on things that algorithms take into account. For instance, heart rate. If the same heart rate keeps going per visit, I mean, he has like 60 each time, the patient has 60 each time, it doesn't really make sense. What you do in real time is go to that center, retrain the center. If you see the same issues during the study, when you exclude those centers from the study in real time, you increase the likelihood of success. And there are very nice articles showing that studies that have failed and cost billions, if you have taken those specific centers in real time, those studies would have been successful. I mean, just taking the data from the good side. So this is one way to save money. The other way to save money, we have big databases in Teva, for instance. We have big databases with placebo responders because we know who was on placebo in clinical studies and who was not on placebo. I mean, retrospectively. When we profile the patients, we can have a profile of a patient and screen those patients in the next study and not include them in the study and not fail the study because of those patients. This is an example. So the 100 billion can become 40 billion a year with more products coming into the market.
Thank you very much. We heard so many different questions, from the development of drugs to accessibility and data and many other things, including the genomic and the promise of changing cancer treatment with some disappointment, but hopefully with some future development, and of course extending the physician's capabilities. So these are many very different angles, and I'm going to ask a question going back to the numbers that I started with. I started with throwing you billions of dollars, how many was invested in US, how many in Europe, and so on. If you had $1 billion and you only were committed to improve health through AI, where would you put this money?
So my answer, I'm not sure it's going to be that interesting, but I kind of agree with what you said. If we want to actually help as many people as we possibly can, we should get people to stop smoking. Right? This is going to increase life expectancy. We should get them clean water. This is the easiest part, etc. But I actually want to refer to what you were actually mentioning before. As we were talking before this, there's a big distance between research, eventually, where AI can be easily applied, and eventually how you go into practice. Specifically in the drug field, I'll tell you kind of what I saw with my little experience in that. So you're probably all aware of Moore's Law, that every year technology is getting smaller, cheaper, everything is amazing. So in pharmaceutical, it's exactly the opposite. It's even called Eroom Law, that every year it's twice as more expensive, takes twice the amount of time, FDA aggregation, maybe placebo effect, nobody knows. And there's a big movement towards, can we think about moving from novel drug development to drug repositioning? Taking already existing drugs and seeing what changes you can do on them to actually make it happen. So I was working very closely with the Maccabi Center, specifically with Professor Varda Shalev, and we were trying to take all of this 30 years of experience and say, maybe some person took some drug and it helped him in a completely other disease. We tried it out and we found hundreds of those. Some of them made no sense. I'll give you an example. It turns out that people using liquid soap have lower blood pressure than people that are using regular soap. Of course, this probably relates to age. But then we found even more interesting things, which relates to your question. We found that one of the most common drugs used today for hypertension, it's around, I think 25% of the people about the age of 50, not only correlates with causing Parkinson, but actually we found the causation biological process. And this is one of the oldest drugs that's been used for the beta blockers, I think been used for at least 30 years. And now even biological studies have even confirmed this. So if you're thinking about what's the best thing we can do with AI, maybe we can find existing drugs that are causing problems. Because after a drug went to the market, it's so hard to identify additional side effects. Google had a really interesting work with Microsoft, looking at search logs of people looking for a drug and then a side effect, and approximately the same time identifying new side effects. Well, this is where the big wins are. Everything else, I'm not sure that we're there yet.
Thank you very much. So I know where you will put your money. I'm curious about the rest. And let's do it quickly because we have, so you can just...
I think we should put the money, definitely prevention is the best way to prevent cancer. I think what we should put the money is on the patients. We all keep talking about the patient in the center, but if we actually think about it, most of the systems that we work in or the systems that we develop are actually physicians-oriented or nurses, and not patient-oriented. And if you talk about patient-reported outcomes, there was a recent paper about a year ago showing that the use of an application by which the patient reported on his own outcomes on real time to a care provider actually increased his survival more than any new immunotherapy. The thing is that it's much easier to put to the market a new medication that costs billions than put dedicated nurses that will be on the end of the application. So we need those persons. And actually I think putting the patients in the middle of the process and putting it in the center of the process, using either applications or other devices, that would cause the major change.
Two things about funding. One is, so I have like 20 people working on healthcare projects and 5 people who work on flood forecasting in India. And it's very, very clear who are saving more lives, right? So we launched a flood forecasting system, which is able to tell people that they should evacuate, and it has a much bigger impact like in that term than anything else that we do. So if you only want to save like lives and spend a little money, this is where I would go. The other area which relates to what you said is actually letting the patients own their own data. So we talk all the time about, we have this consortium of hospitals that does this research, and we have this body who has this many medical records, and this is what we do. But this is not right, and this is not efficient. I think that having tools which would let everybody own their own data, and then being able to choose where to participate could really advance things forward. This can help science because, once people own their data and they can say, I'm willing to participate in this research, it would be much easier for us, knowing that this is actually legitimate, where if a hospital owns the patient's data, it's always a little bit murky if they can use it, if they cannot use it, what they can use it for. We need to really go to the patient. This will have, and again, in Israel, the situation is good because data is not segregated, but this is not the case in other places in the world. So having like patients own their own data from all their encounters and all the places that they receive treatment for would also let them have better data. And it will also let them, if they have all the data and they have all the analytics on their data and they're in the center, they will also get better medicine.
We agree with all the comments so far. I think they suggest it takes up to about 17 years on average for anything novel or innovative to get into practice because we're so conservative. So that means that anything that was created around the turn of the millennium is only hitting practice now, which is quite a sobering thought. So I'd probably agree with everything that's said, but if I had that amount of money, I'd spend probably around 25% on data acquisition and working with more data, probably around 25% on systems and also looking into sustainability and introducing this much quicker into clinical practice, and 50% on governmental and regulatory lobbying. Because one of the biggest challenges we have is that we can create all this stuff, but we are still bogged down with trying to introduce it into reimbursement systems, into our healthcare systems, political support and control and so forth. And it's the stuff that often is left for everyone else to do and takes just as many years to try and address.
So I would take the 1 billion, try to make it the 60 billion that I was talking about, the gap, by taking about 300 million for education. Education for whom? For physicians and caregivers, because I think they are the scouters, in my opinion, I'm coming from the industry, for innovation that I didn't think about, or effect that I didn't think about, like Kira was mentioning. So these are the 300 million. Also education for the regulator, and I totally agree. If you encounter a very educated regulator about the possibilities in AI and how it can serve the pharmaceutical industry development, clinical development, I mean, it's a whole new ball game. And the 700 million I would use to develop additional tools to make sure that once I run a clinical study, at the end of the study, I know, even if it's a failed study, I know that I can trust the results. Because many times we have a decision point, maybe after phase 1, phase 2, and we had to decide, and then we move forward and we spend the money on something that would fail. If I know by the end of phase 1 or phase 2 that these are the real results, I can, divert the money to something which would work.
So thank you very much. The bad news are that I don't have this $1 billion to give you. The good news are that we have a very strong ecosystem in Israel that it seems to start to emerge in a way that attracts these huge sums of money, and working together we can lead this to make a difference. Thank you very much.